Wednesday. I am Brendan Kinney with UpNorthLive News. Thanks so much for joining us here in the UpNorthLive digital studio. We're streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, and X with, already October's installment of your Mental Health Connection. Glad you can be with us. We have Alyssa, Michelle, and Lisa. Alyssa, for those who don't know you, if you can introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, my name is Alyssa. I am adult outpatient therapist supervisor for Northern Lakes Community Mental Health. So we cover all 4 different offices, and is it 6, 7 counties, guys? Help me out. I don't have it right off the top of my head, but 6. So we have Cadillac, Grayling, Houghton Lake, and Traverse City are our offices.
Thank you, Alyssa. Yeah, with Northern Lakes Community Mental Health. And Lisa, we'll go down to you. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm the operations manager for the mentally ill adult side on case management and currently ACT team services. We do work in all 4 offices, and we serve the severely mentally ill population adult.
And Michelle, good morning to you.
Good morning. I am team lead for the Assertive Community Treatment Program, and I primarily work with people with mental illness out in the community, bringing them medicine and monitoring symptoms. And I work out of Roscommon and Crawford counties in northern Michigan.
Mm-hmm. And that's where we're all based out of. We know we have viewers all over the place, but at least that's where our guests are joining us from this morning. So we'll get right into today's topic. It's all about schizophrenia. And we'll start with Michelle. If you can tell us what it is, we'll start there.
Well, schizophrenia is a chronic and persistent mental illness that affects the way people think, feel, and behave. Most times it appears that people lose track with reality when they're experiencing symptoms of schizophrenia.
And we do have a link. I was sent an email that you wanted to share a link. It's to a day in the life of somebody with schizophrenia. So if you want to check that out, that's in the comments right now. Lisa, what may be the cause or causes of schizophrenia?
As with most things with brain illnesses, there's not a whole lot known, like the root cause, but generally speaking, symptoms arise from childhood trauma, the death of a loved one, for example. Bullying is a large one. Another one is migration. Someone that moves a lot, that's considered a childhood trauma and can lead to schizophrenia symptoms.
Lisa, what about genetics? Does that play a role?
Genetics is indeed a large portion of the schizophrenia. If it is expressed, shown, evident in a parent, about 80% of the time it will show up in a child. And if one twin has it, there's a 50% chance that both twins will express it and demonstrate the gene.
And Alyssa, what kind of symptoms may people have with this?
Yeah, so with schizophrenia, there's 2 different kind of categories of symptoms that you'll see. So those are both negative and positive. So when you're thinking negative and positive, that's going to be like addition and subtraction. So not like good or bad symptoms. So positive symptoms are kind of the things that people might think of more often when they think of schizophrenia. Those are things that people with schizophrenia would be experiencing in addition to what would be expected of the general population. So those are things like delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, or catatonic behavior. So some examples there, like delusions, would be having fixed beliefs that something is true even when there's evidence to the contrary. Hallucinations are hearing, seeing, smelling, touching, feeling things that aren't there. Disorganized speech, catatonic behavior can be lots of different things. So speech being jumbled or irrelevant, not speaking, eating, or drinking, not responding to people or the environment, holding unusual postures, repeating the same movements or phrases, mimicking speech movements, doing what others are told. So a lot of different things that can come out in the catatonic disorganized behavior. So those are kind of the positive symptoms. Negative symptoms are going to be things that are missing or reduced that would be expected in the general population. So those are things like reduced motivation, difficulty showing emotions, social withdrawal, not loss of interest in daily activities. those kind of things that you would expect normally that you might not see with someone with schizophrenia.
Thanks, Alyssa. Michelle, we'll go back to you. How can the symptoms vary from person to person?
Well, like Alyssa explained, there is a vast array of different symptoms. So not every person who has schizophrenia presents the same way. Some people are disorganized, so the way they talk, the way they act, even the way they dress is very chaotic and doesn't fit in with their environment. Other people are very paranoid, so they're worried that people are out to get them, people are watching them, can read their thoughts or their brain waves. And then there's other people who are just experience hallucinations and don't know what is going on around them, if it's real or if it's a hallucination. And a lot of times people are unaware of their symptoms that they're having. They don't believe that they have schizophrenia, even if what they're doing or feeling doesn't fit in with the people around them are saying. They just don't know that it's not happening.
Thanks, Michelle. Does anybody want to add anything to this?
I think one of the most important things to realize, Brendan, is that people don't, like Michelle said, people don't understand that they have the disease because they don't differentiate between our normal inner monologue and possibly those internal voices that they are hearing.
And then Alyssa, what about level of functioning? You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so level of functioning can vary quite a bit. Not like Michelle was saying, not everyone has all of those negative and positive symptoms that I was listing. Really, you only need a couple for the diagnosis to hit for someone. So the symptoms can be vastly different from one person to the next and how they're presenting and how it's looking. When we are looking at diagnosis, we're looking at clinical significance, which is like the level of impact that it has on someone's personal life. So when we're looking at that, we would look at areas like work, interpersonal relationships, and self-care as areas that could be affected by this. And I do also want to kind of normalize these symptoms here in that anything that we're diagnosing is a symptom that people have to some extent. Because who hasn't thought they heard their name called when it wasn't, or who hasn't thought they felt a bug crawling on them when it wasn't? But we're not all getting schizophrenia diagnoses for that. It's about the level of impact on your life.
I know you touched on this, Alyssa. Are there any other areas of life that people may struggle with?
Yeah, a lot of times work, interpersonal relationships, self-care. I mean, you can definitely see how these symptoms could get in the way. People with schizophrenia tend to feel overwhelmed easily because there's less of a mental filter where, while we're having this conversation, I'm not listening to the buzzing of the lights or the whir, where people with thought disorders have a more difficult time blocking those out. So things can get very overwhelming quickly.
Michelle, what might this feel like for somebody experiencing these symptoms?
Well, a lot of times people experience fear, especially in the beginning when they first get the diagnosis or they first start having those symptoms. They don't know what's happening. They don't know what to expect. So it is kind of scary. And a lot of times it's chaotic. There's so many things going on throughout your mind, sensations you're feeling, things that you think are happening that people are telling you that they're not happening. So you don't really know what to believe. And a lot of people lose trust in themselves. They feel like they've seen something and people are telling them it's hallucination. So they don't know what to believe. So I think overall it's very chaotic.
Lisa, was there anything else to add?
Yeah, I think we should really add in here is that they experience a lack of insight, whether it's because people are telling them that, what you're seeing isn't really happening, or it's the disease itself, because a lot of people with schizophrenia don't see this as a disease and they don't have it. So a lack of insight, easily victimized is a serious problem for people with schizophrenia.
And Alyssa, before we go on to the next subject, anything else you want to add to that topic?
Yeah, I guess I could just point out on the video that you shared, that is one example of one person's experience. So that has a lot of the symptoms that one might see for the positive symptoms there. So that can be a way to look at what that would be like. It's called a day in a life. So it's supposed to be what symptoms could look like for someone.
And yeah, that's all in the comments section.
Yeah. And if people are watching that video later, recognize too that those things that they're seeing, like that is just as real as it looks in the video to us. The brain does not differentiate between hallucination and reality. It looks just the same.
And Lisa, we'll go back to you. At what age do people usually begin to show symptoms?
Historically, psychiatrists would not hand out this diagnosis unless they had their break, is an old word, in their 20s. However, we are seeing people with the schizophrenia diagnosis as young as 15 and into their 50s.
And then Michelle, talk about treatments. Can you add anything to that conversation?
Well, the best treatments for people with schizophrenia is usually medications. There is a wide array of medications that work to effectively treat those hallucinations and the paranoid thoughts. But it's different for every person because everybody has different symptoms. So a lot of times going through different medications and trying them out and finding out which one works best for that person is usually what treatment looks like, along with getting support from a counselor or a mental health provider and family supports, people to help them navigate the system, help them understand what's being explained to them and kind of like break it down into ways that they can understand.
Melissa, do you want to talk about the therapy side of things?
Yeah, I'll touch on that a little more since we do therapy. So, medication is the best practice. That's generally what you're going to want with schizophrenia. You can't therapy away the symptoms of a thought disorder. However, there are some therapeutic methods that can be beneficial. One of these that we sometimes run here at Northern Lakes is FPE. It stands for Family Psychoeducation. That's a group for individuals with thought disorders and their loved ones. So that has education for the person and their loved ones, and it works on problem solving and social support.
And then Lisa, I'm hoping to get some insight from you on this here, what it's like to receive a schizophrenia diagnosis for a person.
I can't speak firsthand, but however, it must be very traumatic in that, first of all, there's most likely going to be an MRI of the brain to see if there is a physiological response. Is this caused by a tumor or some other condition happening physically in the brain? There also can be cognitive effects. And then once a person is started on medication, they're very tired. The salivation increases. So that is a very negative social, people don't want to be walking through mire with drool running down their face from a medication to control their symptoms. So it is a very, very traumatic diagnosis for the person and the family.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of the family side of things, Alyssa, do you want to touch on how that diagnosis affects the family?
Yeah, I spend more time with families in the group here, absolutely. So Lisa had, mentioned how this usually starts late teens, early 20s for folks. And this can be very difficult for loved ones because their loved one with schizophrenia, is functioning normally, and all of a sudden they're not. This can happen. A lot of times it happens, while kids are going off to college or things like that too, because that's kind of the age range that we're looking at. So because of that too, it's usually young adults. Parents have often lost guardianship because they're adults now and can't get a lot of information. So it can be really confusing too. So that's where family education can be really important to let them know what to expect. Also letting them know about negative symptoms, because those can be perceived as just being lazy as character traits when it's really part of the symptoms of schizophrenia too.
Michelle, how can a person be supportive of a loved one diagnosed with schizophrenia?
I always tell people to try to understand the symptoms if you can and validate the person, what they're going through, what they're expressing is what they truly feel is happening. So just validating and saying, I know that you feel like this is happening, but I'm not feeling the same thing, or I'm not hearing what you're hearing. And try to help them understand that what they're experiencing is different from what the rest of the world is. Also, a lot of listening. Sometimes people just want to be heard. And when you just say that's not happening. Sometimes the person feels like it's they're not being trusted, or they get combative when they hear those kind of things.
Mm-hmm. This one's for you, Lisa. Is there a correlation between drug use and schizophrenia?
Not all drug use. However, research and significant research has shown that marijuana, methamphetamine, and some cocaine use has a strong correlation and can actually lead to irreversible schizophrenia symptoms.
And Lisa, sometimes people with serious mental illness portrayed in movies and TV like they are a danger to society. Are people with schizophrenia dangerous?
Unfortunately, people with schizophrenia, those that have had a negative impact on society, such as David Berkowitz, those are the ones we remember. But the true thing is that people with schizophrenia are far more likely to be victimized by family and others. They're more likely to be used for their disability money, their housing, because they're just easily victimized. They're easily pushed around, and they feel that their voice is not heard or validated. So while the negative population, the very, very tiny people who have had schizophrenia and have acted out and become infamous for their actions, are the headliners, more than likely by a significant amount, they're far more victimized than being the aggressor.
And also, hopefully, you can clear up some confusion here. Maybe in the movies, we hear about split personality and schizophrenia. Can you talk about the differences between those two?
Yes, that is something that I hear a lot. Those get clumped together. They are entirely separate diagnoses. So the split personality is actually called dissociative identity disorder, and that's where someone has two or more distinct personality states. I see this most as something that looks to develop as a way of coping with past trauma, usually going back to childhood, where there weren't a lot of options for getting out of the situation.
Mm-hmm. And then, Michelle, if someone has questions about whether a loved one may have schizophrenia or if something feels off, what should a person do to help?
Well, I always tell people to reach out to their doctors as a first line of defense, or call the local CMHs wherever they're located. Here in Northern Michigan, there is 4 different offices that we work out of. There's also a lot of information online. NAMI has a very good website for people who are experiencing symptoms, and also for families who have questions and who want to learn more information on the disorders. We also have a crisis intervention line in our local area where people who are experiencing symptoms or family members who are concerned can call and get support that way.
Thank you, Michelle, for that. I think it was Alyssa who was talking about that video that we posted, that YouTube video. As we wrap up, if somebody's just tuning in, Alyssa, can you let them know what that video is all about there in the comments section?
Yeah, so the video is called A Day in a Life, and it is kind of like you're walking around as if you were a person with schizophrenia, and it has a lot of those positive symptoms in there that someone might experience. So it'll just kind of give us a bit of what might be happening where someone with a thought disorder who is walking through life, and some of the things that can come up and how that can look so real to them. So it can be a little scary. So I think they have like a disclaimer at the start of the video too of what's happening there, and just knowing too that that's all, they pretty much go over all of the ones that you can see on a camera. That's not the experience for everybody, but that is an example of something that someone might experience with schizophrenia.
Mm-hmm. Michelle, I know you talked about ways to reach out. Again, for somebody just tuning in, we are all based in Northern Michigan. We know we have viewers from all over the place, all over the country. But if somebody wants to go, it can be Michelle, Alyssa, Lisa, go over some of the best ways to get a hold of you, your other team members, if anybody has any questions or concerns.
Well, we have an intake line, a general intake line at Northern Lakes Community Mental Health. They will connect you with the office that's closest to you based on your county. We are very rural, as everybody knows. So your county, the office in another county may actually be closer for you. We will work with you. Give us a call, get to an intake specialist, and let's get you into services if you feel like you're having symptoms and you need some help, just give us a call. We're here for you.
Well, thank you. I know there's a lot of information to go through. We're 20 minutes in. I'm sure there's a lot more even that we could talk about here. Was there anything else that anybody wanted to mention before we wrap up today?
I think there's one thing we should mention, Brendan, is that the NAMI chapter has chapters in Cadillac and Traverse City, and they do have actual support meetings in both locations for the families of people with mental illness, and it can be a huge support, especially for when there's a new diagnosis.
Mm-hmm. And Michelle, did you have something as well? Oh, listen to.
I also wanted to add that there is a website, northernlakescmh.org, that you can shoot questions to us or ask, how do I get somebody involved in services or get information? So that is available too.
And Alyssa, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say, that support is so important, as it can be for the person who's experiencing schizophrenia, getting that social support from others going through the same thing can be nice. And then family members too. It's very important to have other families that you can interact with, which is very important too, to kind of normalize and be able to learn from each other going through that.
Alyssa, Lisa, Michelle, thank you so much for your time. Thanks to our viewers on the UpNorthLive streaming platforms. We're on Facebook, YouTube, and X. We can see 50 people watching right now at this moment. See the comments, and we thank you for your time. And ladies, thank you for your time. And we'll leave it there, at least for this month, and we'll see you back here next month for another edition. Take care.
Thank you.